We are podcasting from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization Airfield Pavement Team meeting in Den Bosch, Netherlands. This is Inside AFIMSC, a new podcast dedicated to bringing you news and information from our leaders, experts, and teammates. I'm Veronica Kemeny, your host. Again, we're at the 11th Airfield Pavement Team meeting in Den Bosch, Netherlands, and I'm here with the chairman, Dr. Craig Rutland, who is in charge of this meeting, and you're also part of the AFIMSC family and the Air Force Civil Engineer family. Welcome. Thank you, Veronica. I appreciate the introduction. We're here today with three other members of the team that are supporting NATO in this endeavor, and we have with us our secretary, Mr. Scott Mitchell.
Yes, very nice to be here today. This is actually our 11th meeting we've had. We've been to many nations, and again, we have a very good turnout with 6 nations involved, and we are on our way to getting a very productive meeting.
So we also have the Navy in the house, and tell us who you are.
I'm Scott Harold from Naval Facilities Engineering Command Atlantic. I'm the Airfield Pavement Evaluation Coordinator for the Navy. This is my second time at this meeting, and I've always been excited to be part of the group, and I learn something every time.
And we have another engineer here.
Hello, my name is Steve Schoaf. I also work with the Air Force supporting Dr. Rutland. Definitely a pleasure. My second NATO meeting also, and like I said, just with Scott. We're looking forward to what has already been a very productive meeting.
So, Dr. Rutland, what are we doing here at this meeting? And tell us about the NATO countries that are actually here.
Well, again, we invite all of the participating countries and partner countries in NATO. We, from time to time, have a larger audience. Some of it is driven by schedules and other exercises that are going on, but primarily what the individuals that participate in this meeting are custodians of standards and recommendations that this team is charged with sustaining, maintaining, and developing. We also have opportunities not only to look at the documents themselves, but to look at challenges associated with implementing those.
And we're looking at,
standards.
just so our listeners know, at pavement and airfields.
Correct.
So why is that important for us?
Well, that's the launch and recovery system for all of our weapon systems. So we as an organization, as an Air Force, that's our, for lack of a better way of putting it, raison d'etre. Without that, we don't need civil engineers in a uniform out in dusty locations around the world.
And tell me why it's so important to have NATO here.
To have NATO here, I would say that from a mission purpose, it's great to have all the nations understanding what needs to be done so that we can support the mission safely.
And Scott, you're representing the Navy, so you have the same issues as the Air Force.
Yeah, we have many of the same issues, and also the Navy has a few unique weapons, platforms, aircraft that a lot of the nations, not all of them have them. One like the F-35B doing vertical takeoffs and landings, and we share the MV-22, which is also a demanding aircraft platform. But it's all about coming together and making sure that there are no surprises.
So tell me about what the goal is for this and the NATO folks.
Well, obviously, we NATO countries all work together, so it's a process of actually sharing information, sharing requirements. Just as Scott said, we have different platforms. As Dr. Rutland said, we have different platforms. So do the other NATO nations. So it's actually coming together such that we actually can jointly share information and assets.
And Steve, you all are engineers. It sounds like most of you are civil engineers?
Structural engineers, but yes, boring engineers, yes.
What else are some of the takeaways that we've learned, Dr. Rutland, being here this week with all of our NATO nations?
Well, again, I guess to sum up why we were here is, in a word, is interoperability. We want to be able to bring our equipment to bear at any of the NATO locations and know that the infrastructure that is there is designed and maintained and sustained to handle any of the equipment that the U.S. might bring forward, and vice versa, anytime that they might show up at an airfield where we're designing, constructing, sustaining, maintaining that infrastructure. They have the confidence that they're going to be able to operate there without any problems. And with that in mind, we oftentimes, much of what we learn in the meeting actually has, we gain more from the informal discussions that occur in between the formal discussions of the standards, where we're allowed to share, I'll call it war stories, what problems they've had in implementing these standards, what issues they've run into either employing some new platform or dealing with some new environment that they had not been dealing with before. For example, when the RPAs started to show up in greater numbers.
And what are RPAs?
The remotely piloted aircraft, then we all started to see a need to get together as a group to make sure that we all understood what the requirements were for those aircraft and how to operate without stepping on one another's toes, as it were. And so we're able to put a team of experts together, people that have similar concerns. They're able to talk through the concerns, the issues, and figure out what is the best way to convey the information to the field. Sometimes that's a standard. Sometimes it's just simply providing some informational, a platform or a document that provides the extra information.
So for our listeners, a lot of them don't understand airfield issues. What are some of the airfield issues? Who wants to take that one?
I would, Scott Mitchell. I wanted to mention that one of the main objectives of this particular working group is to put together standardization agreements for all the nations to agree to. And these standardization agreements deal with pavement condition index surveys and the procedures for doing those, runway friction and braking conditions, airfield damage repair, airfield design, air-based airfield operations on unsurfaced runways, contingency airfields, and one of the documents that we provide input to is a NATO document called 85.5, which deals with NATO criterion standards for airfields. And that is used by the 29 NATO nations and the Partners for Peace.
So you're trying to get everybody on the same sheet of music is what I've gathered this week being at these meetings. And I know you have asphalt and concrete that airfields are made of, and there's issues involved with that. So what are some of the issues so people understand? Because I've learned that airplanes, they're big airplanes, small airplanes, they weigh different amounts. So tell us about that. And tell us who you are again.
This is Scott Harold with NAFAC. So one of the primary issues we have is aircraft that are extremely heavy compared to what the airfields were designed So one thing that we do when we do evaluations is we check for the load capacity of those pavements. So everyone can appreciate not bringing an aircraft there that's going to destroy a host nation's airfield. Other aspects are high-performance aircraft that do things such as short takeoffs, making sure that those airfields are in a good enough condition that we don't end up damaging the airfield and potentially shutting the runway down.
And what about the camaraderie? Because a lot of you have been to these meetings before. It seems like you have built relationships. So who would like to talk about the relationships that come out of this meeting?
Well, it is one reason why we get a lot done is that everybody has the same objectives, and that comes to play of people actually wanting to find out what other nations are doing and to use that technology to develop better airfields themselves.
I think the fact that they share the same passions helps. There are also folks that in many respects deal with the same issues, albeit caused by perhaps a different aircraft. They
what are some of those issues so that listeners understand?
Things dealing with the maintenance of that airfield. So, if I'm flying turboprop aircraft, I can deal with airfield conditions that are, shall we say, a bit more Spartan and perhaps not as well kept. But if I'm going to fly aircraft like a Rafale, a Eurofighter, a F-16, they're much more sensitive to FOD or debris that might be on the airfield, and so all of the challenges associated with doing that. All of the engineers that we're dealing with here, we've had to partner with in addressing problems in the field in locations like Mali and Chad and Niger, Djibouti. All of them have had deployments to places like Afghanistan or Iraq or Qatar. Some of them are joint operations right now with us in places like Jordan. We for lack of a better way of putting it, have chewed the same dirt. We've had to, again, albeit different aircraft, they have some of the same types of issues and concerns. How do I get out in the middle of Timbuktu, for lack of a better way of putting it, some rubber removal equipment? Because if it starts to get too slick, and yes, it's out in the middle of a desert, but even in the desert, you can get enough moisture that it becomes problematic. And so, again, you want to do it at the right time, but...
Scott's wanting to jump in here, Dr. Rutland.
I thought most interesting today was French delegates gave us a briefing on their A400 aircraft. And it's really amazing, has a lot of unique features, and it really, sets in view the kind of collaborative problems that we all have and the way they deal with theirs, and the same is true for ours. And a lot of our objectives actually have to do with operations amongst the nations, and these can be expeditionary airfields that require to be quickly set up and sorties launched, and then it's moved on to a different area. So it all requires a lot of coordination between the nations in doing this, and this is really the details and procedures that we focus on.
And how does this conference help the warfighter? And this is also the NATO warfighter.